Thank you very much, session moderator. Revolutionary greetings to one and all. My thanks to the organizers of the Rojava Center for Strategic Studies, NRLS, for the International Forum on ISIS, Dimensions, Challenges, Strategies for Confrontation, and to all delegates here, comrades, friends, teachers, mothers, fathers, brothers and sisters. The topic I've been tasked with initially was to focus on the violations and crimes by ISIS, namely murder, rape, kidnapping, slavery, and the list goes on. Yesterday we had a whole litany of the offenses that were committed. It is well documented internationally, locally, and regionally. Various organizations have done that as well. What are the implications then after? I therefore would use the South African example and experience with dealing with gross human rights violations through the mechanism of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a tribunal that was then put together by South Africans, which opted not for retributive justice, but for restorative justice. We realized that after 300 years of colonialism and 4 decades of apartheid, the support of the government to the minority to the exclusion of the majority resulted and started with the European settlers in 1652. This oppression of apartheid, legally entrenched in law, socially, politically, educationally, was supported by the United States of America. Militarily in Angola, they gave support to the apartheid state right up until 1985, and the United Kingdom to an extent, despite the systematic arrests, detention, torture, rape, killing, incarceration, arbitrary arrests of South Africans who stood up and resisted apartheid. The international community knew well what was happening, like it knew well what has happened with ISIL and what it has done here in the region. The way in which we, the liberationary movements, the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the Communist Party, the Congress of Trade Unions, mobilized international support to change those perceptions. It did not happen overnight. It took decades of consistent effort and work to change the perceptions in those countries. That then ultimately led to us finally defeating, with the many battles we had with the apartheid state, at a place called Quito Carnavale. The apartheid military was decisively brought to a halt, and we had a lot of assistance from the Cuban military as well. That then convinced the politicians to sit down and seriously think the future of South Africa with the majority of the people who were the victims of the gross human rights violations. I use the term gross human rights violations legally because the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act of 1994 categorized all these crimes as gross human rights violations. The function of the TRC was to bring the perpetrator and the victims together. Obviously, in this context, it may not be possible, but what is possible is the next of kin of families who have been killed. What about the perpetrators and those whom they forced to do things, not of their own volition or will? Legally, how would that complexities be addressed if a tribunal is constituted here soon? What is important, unlike the increasing amount of international solidarity sought by communities, for example, in the Kurdish struggle, looking for international state actors to be facilitators for the solutions peacefully, firstly, accountability for the human rights violations. In South Africa, both parties, the apartheid state through its chief negotiator, the liberation movement through its chief negotiator, came to a negotiated settlement. We did not have outside actors interfering in that process. They were merely neutral in that. We decided for ourselves because it was our past, our present, and our future. Of utmost importance for the Kurds in this region, all other people in this region who were victims of ISIL It is important to understand that. We cannot let our humanity be further debased by seeking vengeance and revenge. We need to think of the future and the next generations to come. That is what motivated us in South Africa to opt for restorative justice as opposed to purely retributive justice. Turning to the issue of how we South Africans institutionalize that forward-looking, progressive individuals from both sides, a collective decision was made, and the interim constitution of 1993 legally constituted in Section 251. We must move into the future building bridges, not based on vengeance, but based on rehabilitation, reintegration, and seeking a better future for all. By 1997, our final constitution superseded the interim constitution, which stands till today. In there, we included Section 9, which dealt with equality with 3 non-derogable rights: race, gender, sexual orientation, to ensure that what happened in the past will never happen again in the future. Together with that, linguistic, cultural, religious, and language rights. We have 11 official languages in South Africa now, not only Afrikaans. And I emphasize that because in June 16, 1976, the apartheid government wanted every black school, its students, to speak their language, Afrikaans. The students from the primary schools to the high schools in the thousands across the country protested. What did the government do? It shot down innocent children, many of them in their backs. From that day onwards, thousands of students joined the liberation movement. Many of them then joined as volunteers in the armed struggle. Those atrocities remain fresh in the minds of many, including myself. I'm also from that generation, the June 16th detachments. But we did not let ourselves in 1994 be blinded just by vengeance and revenge. Very important, very hard to do at the time, but a necessary step in the right direction. Unlike other countries, South Africa did not adopt lustration once democracy was put in place with the new government. Former liberation fighters from the different military wings, Umkhonto we Sizwe, the Pan-Africanist APLA, together with the past regime members, started to work together. Military, education, all different levers of society, unlike countries like East Germany, where lustration took place. How would that happen in this region with former perpetrators who are still in our midst here? Others who are there that are in detention camps. What happens to those prisoners? How will they be dealt with? Those are serious issues where the international community must be assisting the region with, not dictating, assisting, providing the necessary support as soon as possible. All delegates leaving here should exhort the different organizations and countries we come from and lobby groups to do that as a matter of urgency. It's not merely a question of law. Law is a product of a particular power. In South Africa, the law was used by the minority government who was empowered to subjugate the masses. So law is an instrument. Those who have political power should seek the negotiated settlement with a just legal forum to address the human rights violations that have taken place here. The other important thing is the numerous atrocities that took place in South Africa documented internationally. You can go over 150,000 pages. Professor Mamdani spent 3 years in South Africa studying the TRC and its documents. We had over 27,000 applicants from the liberatory movements who applied for amnesty, not only from the perpetrators, the apartheid state and so on. Most of those dealt at the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Framework, that were granted amnesty and met particular conditions. But what is more important, it was not used as a tool for revenge, but as a bridge going into the future. Another important point that was raised by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who vehemently made clear that the TRC was and is based on a principle of indigenous African customary law, which is Ubuntu. If I translate in English, Ubuntu in isiZulu means Umuntu, Angabantu, Angamun. All it means is a person through another. In other words, you put the community first, not the individual. And that was the spirit with which the TRC was approached. You've got to think of the collective, not just individuals. In other words, we all take responsibility going forward. Legally, what is very important in our context is to understand clearly that previously law regulated every aspect of South African society. Thereafter, it moved into a democracy, currently not without challenges. It's not a perfect model, but it's a serious model to consider. Other countries have tried models of tribunals. They used it in Bosnia. It was purely retributive. After 20 years, only 170 odd trials have taken place. In Rwanda, they used elements of restorative justice, and they formed the Gacaca courts. So they learned different methods may yield different results, but it is the individuals who come from those regions that must decide how and when, using whatever is at their disposal here. It is important to understand that our perspective now in a democratic position is an establishment that looks globally on how the interest of the question of how the victor with intra-conflict and inter-conflict deals with the victims as well as those who were affected when the victims were the perpetrators. So would there be national unity? How would that be achieved? Is it only the courts that determine that? Obviously not. By bringing on board all those who were affected, all the ethnic groups, all representatives, different religious groups, and that is very similar to what we did in South Africa, and it is constitutionalized and entrenched. Religious freedom, cultural and linguistic, and languages as well, 11 official languages. Those are important concepts to understand. Right to property is also protected, but not arbitrarily expropriated and so on, although there are political calls for it now. Thank you. The other important point I would like to raise is that it is important to understand that you can only reach what you seek, justice, from within yourself with support from the international community, which is important. I would like to conclude with a quotation from Nelson Mandela, who was in prison for 27 years. Apo is in prison for 2 decades. And when he came out from there, he wasn't bitter and filled with vengeance, and neither were the thousands who were victims of apartheid as well. He said, the truth is that we are not yet free. We have merely achieved the freedom to be free, the right not to be oppressed. We have not taken the final step of our journey, but the first step on a longer and even more difficult road. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. The true test of our devotion to freedom is just beginning. I have walked that long road to freedom. I have had tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way, but I have discovered that the secret moment has now come, the climbing of the great hill. One finds there are many more hills to climb. I have taken a moment here to rest, to steal the view of the glorious vista that surrounds, to look back on the distance I have come, but I can only for a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not yet ended. Thank you.
شكرا دكتور محمود على هذه المداخلة، وهي مهمة عرض تجربة أيضا جنوب أفريقيا. وهنا يجب التنويه بروح الانضباط والمسؤولية عند قوات سوريا الديمقراطية وشعوب المنطقة في تعاملهم مع موقوفي داعش. فهم فعلا برهنوا أنهم ليسوا مجرد قوات boots on the ground أو أقدام على الأرض، بل هم روح وقلب وضمير هذه الإنسانية على الأرض بما فعلوه.